for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome to the Andrew Zimmel Podcast. This one we're going to talk about Zion Williamson, who had his NBA debut a couple nights ago against the San Antonio Spurs. So that added a level of intrigue for me. I know it added a level of intrigue for a lot of the people around the area that record this podcast, because not only was the game against, potentially the guy that's supposed to take the torch from LeBron when we talk about this super athletic, hyper physical young player, right? So there's never been a guy like LeBron. There's never was a guy like Jordan until Kobe. There never was a guy like LeBron, I think, until Zion. And that's a big weight to put on his shoulders, because personally I think that LeBron's the greatest NBA player of all time, it's at least in the last 30 years. I don't think that there's another guy who's been able to touch what LeBron has been able to do. So Zion has his debut. He's the most anticipated rookie debut since Anthony Davis in 2012. This guy comes out of Duke, and we kind of knew before he played a game for the Pelicans that there's going to be a learning period, there's going to be a transition period for Zion. And he comes in, he gets a hurt knee. The Pelicans don't want to rush him back, because when you have a asset that valuable, when you have a player whose ceiling is so high, you can't risk it. So I understood that. The big thing that everybody talked about on sports radio today and sports media just in general, because I wanted to record this podcast earlier, but we had a bunch of difficulties. We're going to get into that at the end of the podcast, because we got to talk about why this wasn't up earlier. But everybody continues to talk about Zion not playing those last 5:53 or whatever. And to me, this is the problem with the NBA media coverage. Because the other thing is, too, that it seems like everybody gets a memo the same day. So Monday and Wednesday, you get a memo of, these are the talking points for the next 2 days. And then Friday, you talk about whatever games are going to happen over the weekend. Sports talk radio, and just sports talk in general, has become so lazy. And that's partially why I want to do a daily podcast, partially why I want to do a podcast in general. Because I think that for too much of the general stuff that gets put out there, you really have to look for something unique, for something that isn't just the same thing over and over and over again. And I know that's kind of ironic as we talk about Zion's debut on this one, but for the most part, I think that I try to do a good enough job, or I try to go give people on to give you a unique perspective. And you're not getting the same run-of-the-mill takes that you would get anywhere else. But the take today was that NBA ratings are down, and part of the reason is load management. And because load management is a thing that everybody's pinpointing for the NBA ratings to be down, that Zion missing those last 5 or so minutes is the reason that the NBA ratings are down. Which, if you follow that train of thought, doesn't make any sense, period. And B, the name I've heard over and over and over and over again from this has been, well, Kawhi sat out last year and won the championship, so now every team is trying to do that. It's a copycat league. But you got to look further, guys. You got to look beyond that same continuous transparent curtain. It's not that difficult to think about. When you have a rookie who is a very large player, you're not going to want to play him with a hurt knee. You're not going to want to rush him back. It just makes too much sense not to do that. Look at the two guys who I think, ironically, are very similar to Zion in his physique and the way that he looks. Blake Griffin, a few years ago, his rookie year, he breaks his kneecap and doesn't play the entire season. He misses his entire rookie season. He comes back and wins Rookie of the Year in 2011. Had he played, he could have come back. The Clippers could have rushed him back, and he could have played the last month of the season. But they didn't do that because they knew that you have a number 1 overall draft pick, and that guy is going to potentially be the franchise cornerstone, so you don't want to mess him up too early. Another player who this is too similar to me was Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid comes in the league knowing that he has back problems, knowing that he has feet issues, and the 76ers sit him the entire season. And then the next year, they put him on a very tight minutes restriction. Look at him now. Joel Embiid is night in and night out the best and most talented center in the NBA. So when you got a guy like Zion, who has the potential to take the torch from LeBron and be like the next face of the league, you don't rush him back. And that's what the Pelicans did. They didn't rush him back. The Pelicans know that they're not going to compete for a playoff spot this year, or if they are, it's going to be an 8 seed. They're going to end up playing the Clippers in the first round, the Lakers in the first round, and just get mollywopped because they don't have that team. They don't have the dogs. The front office knows that. Everybody, I think, around the organization knows that this is a team that's 5 years, 6 years away from being a legitimate title contender. I love Brandon Ingram and what he's done with his game. Lonzo Ball has really figured out his role on this team. Drew Holiday looked really good. You add Zion, Jackson Hayes, Greg Monroe. This is a team that has a good mix of rookies and young players and kind of vets and guys that have been around the league. I like the Pelicans going forward. I think that this is going to be a very interesting and fun team to watch going forward. But it doesn't make sense. And this is, I didn't want to start the podcast with this, but I had to. This doesn't make sense. The take over and over and over again that, Zion should have played the entire game. There's no way that you could have known that, he could have played those last 5 minutes. I continue. I don't know if people don't watch basketball that talk about basketball or if people just forget things so soon. In 2012, we had Derrick Rose, arguably the most talented point guard in the league at that time, blow out his ACL in a meaningless playoff game against the 76ers where the Bulls were running away with the game. And Thibodeau played him, and he blew out his ACL, and that was the end of Derrick Rose, a potential Hall of Famer. Every single time we have a young player and we sit him out these couple minutes, I am fine with that. I am fine with Zion missing a little bit of time because I know what they're protecting him from. Because he's a big dude with a injury on his knee. Why do we need to play him in a game that, in the grand scheme of things, isn't going to matter that much for the Pelicans moving forward? Now, for the Spurs, that game mattered a lot because you had to win that game to stay in the playoff hunt. And I think the Spurs are seriously considering, okay, we're getting the playoff spot. This is what I think that the crossroads for them was 2 weeks ago when you could have tanked and lost 5 games in a row and said, okay, well, now we're going to trade LaMarcus and DeRozan, and we're just going to get some picks and try to stock up. And this is a fun 20-year-plus run, but now we're going to figure things out. I think 2 weeks ago they decided internally, hey, we're going for this. We're running for the playoff spot. It's boom or bust. And we're not going to take the bottom out of this. We're going to continue to fight for that playoff spot, which I enjoy. I think that that's a really good way to look at things, especially for the Spurs organization, who's known for winning some games. So the other thing I want to say is he had 17 of his 22 points in the fourth quarter, which doesn't seem like a big deal. I don't think people are making, again, because the narrative is he should have played the entire game for some reason. I don't think not enough people are making a point of saying that when Zion got hot, when he was able to play the way that he needed to play or the way he wanted to play. I think he hit 4 threes in that game too, which is something at Duke he wasn't very good at. Duke, he was kind of a so-so shooter. He was more of a slasher type guy, which I thought was going to hold him back in a league that continually moves out to the perimeter or right underneath the basket. It's a dunk or three type league right now. I thought that Zion maybe not being able to get to the basket would hurt his game. You're playing grown men, and you're not playing some 17, 20-year-old-ish guy who's on a academic scholarship in the ACC. You're not playing that guy. You're playing legitimate guys that are playing for a paycheck every single night. So I thought that might hinder Zion. But if he's able to be a consistent, if not okay, three-point shooter, then his rookie year going forward, going into sophomore and 3 years down the road, he's going to be a legitimate all-star guy every single year. If you can shoot threes and he can continue to be healthy and have that athleticism, there's nothing that's going to stop this guy. People are already making jokes that he shot more threes than Ben Simmons. I thought that was kind of funny, especially, and we haven't talked about this. We didn't talk about this too much on the old show, but I'm trying to get guests from Philadelphia and New Orleans to come on to talk to me about what I think is a trade that makes too much sense, Ben Simmons for Drew Holiday. In that, okay, Ben Simmons now gets his own team. Brandon Ingram's really good. That's a shooter for him. Lonzo Ball, so-so shooter. J.J. Redick's a really good shooter. You make that trade if you're the Pelicans. Now you got two. You have two potential all-stars, potential superstars in Ben Simmons and Zion, and a couple really good pieces in Lonzo and Brandon Ingram. I think that that's a really good trade. Drew Holiday fits back in with the 76ers. He's an actual point guard that can shoot, that can play defense, that can initiate an offense, and you don't have 2-3 power forwards running around for the 76ers. You got a guy that isn't afraid to shoot the three. I like that trade a lot. So again, 22 points in 18 minutes of game action. That's the most points per minute for any player in the shot clock era to start their career, which, again, I said that was a really big deal. I was talking to my friends about it, and I said, hey, I think that it's like 15.5 was his like over-under for points, and 5.5 was the over-under for rebounds. And I think he got like 22 and 7, which, hands down, that's a really good stat line for a guy who we didn't know if he was going to play this year or not. The other thing is, too, and we talked about this before, that Ja Morant has now taken he's taken a lead over everybody else in the Rookie of the Year. That it's not a competition anymore, in my opinion at least, that nobody's going to catch up to Ja Morant and what he's been able to do this season. RJ Barrett in New York, kind of been so-so. The Celtics kids aren't really like they're good and they're good pieces, and maybe in the playoffs they will pop off like Tatum and Jaylen Brown have done in years past in their rookie years, that they make the playoffs and they do something special. But right now, I don't think any of those guys are really going to have any competition. It really does feel like it's Ja Morant and the entire field, which, to be fair, I think people were thinking that before the season, that, okay, the kid could be really special. The first week of the season, he already caught like 2 or 3 bodies on dunks. His playmaking has been really impressive to me. I didn't know, I didn't watch a ton of Ja Morant footage when he was in college. I watched a little bit of it in the tournament, and then I went back and watched some of his highlight tapes before the draft. And I thought, okay, this is a kid that if he goes number 2 overall, that wouldn't shock me. When the Pelicans and the Memphis Grizzlies got the first 2 picks, I was like, oh, I guess that's good for small market teams, but for the enjoyment of the league, I thought that might pull it back a little bit. I was incorrect there, because the Memphis Grizzlies now have gotten highlights after highlights after highlights after Ja Morant. It's a really good thing for them, because once Gasol left, once they traded Gasol at the trade deadline last year, I thought that franchise was going to become irrelevant. Jalen Jack Jr., JJJ, is really good, but he's not a guy that I'm turning on the TV every night to watch. Atlanta has Trae Young and John Collins. That's the other really young team. I thought that, especially in Atlanta, a media hub, I was like, okay, that's going to be the young team that the NBA writers and everybody really likes. But Memphis with Ja Morant and Triple J, outstanding. Love what they're doing over there. But it's going back to Zion and him not being able to close the gap. I think that the Pelicans, what they should do from here on out is they should go and find the good middle ground between okay, we're going to play you every single night and we're going to get you reps that they did with Anthony Davis, and that Joel Embiid, okay, we're going to put you on tight minutes restriction. I think that there's a good middle ground in between there to figure it out, especially early in his career. Like, if this is year 7 or year 8 for Zion and he's still kind of having to be put on minutes restrictions and still be put in the same type of situation where, okay, we need to cool you down, we can't have you play back-to-backs. If it's that, then, okay, I might have an issue with that. What are we... If he's healthy, he needs to be playing. But in the first beginning of his career, when he's coming off a knee injury, and he needs to lose about 20 pounds, I think that he still looks a little fat. You live in New Orleans, that's kind of what happens to you. But once he sheds the weight, once he gets into playing weight, once he figures out the NBA game, this kid's going to be really special. I'm really excited. And if that is what it costs, if it took Anthony Davis going to L.A. for the Pelicans to go get a generational guy like this, I'm all here for it. He reminds me in a good way of Jabari Parker. And I'm going to explain that. When Jabari Parker got drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, a lot of people around the league thought, okay, it's Wiggins, Jabari Parker, Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid's not playing this year because he's got a bunch of physical issues. Wiggins gets traded to Minnesota, which was kind of in turmoil after they traded Kevin Love, so we knew that they were going to be rebuilding. Jabari Parker, before he got that ACL injury, we thought for sure he was going to be the guy in Milwaukee. And then, of course, Giannis shows up. Those two never could really – well, Jabari couldn't stay on the court and get healthy and play with Giannis. And then once he finally was healthy, Giannis was already such a star and such a great player that it was just too small of a place for two guys that need the ball like that. So then he goes and leaves. But when he got drafted, the whole story was, oh, this is a kid that wants to stay in Milwaukee, that he was excited to play for the Bucks. Zion reminds me of that, in that I think that the Pelicans organization will work with him. I think that he's a Southern kid. I think that he feels like the type of guy that is going to play the majority of his career in the South, which is great because the last guy that I really can remember in the South that was like, okay, people in the South actually like vibe with this guy, I don't think it was Anthony Davis. I think it was Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul was the last guy in the southeastern United States that when people watched him play, they were like, oh, yeah, no, that's our guy. And I think Zion is going to be that for Louisiana. And he looks really excited to be there, too. So we've kind of we went really in-depth on this, debut. I got my rant out of the way of people continually. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, I said this about baseball writers on Twitter during the Hall of Fame ballots, that the only people that hate baseball more than the general public are baseball writers. The only people that take themselves more seriously than literally anyone. I always thought it was the music writers. I always thought music writers were the most pretentious. No, it's sports writers. Sports writers act like this is life and death, that them writing about how Derek Jeter's on-base percentage makes him not worthy of being a unanimous Hall of Famer. NBA Twitter, NBA fans are driving me crazy right now with what they've been doing with these storylines. And part of it is that the social media teams for TNT and Bleacher Report and ESPN are doing such a poor job of highlighting all of the excitement in the league, and they're only force-feeding us the same type of content over and over and over again. I think that's part of the issue. But come on, like, sports radio killed Zion today, and it doesn't make any sense. So we're going to get that's all I'm going to talk about with this. So then thank you for listening to the podcast. Big podcast news. We are now on Apple Podcasts and on Google Podcasts. So that makes us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and then a bunch of other smaller podcast sites. What that means for you, and YouTube, what that means for you is now when you say to somebody, hey, have you listened to the Andrew Zimmel podcast? And they say no, well, then now there's no excuse. There's no excuse for us not to be sharing this content with our close friends. So thank you again for listening. We put a bunch of stuff up, so you're going to want to go listen to all of that. I'm trying to go get, again, more writers for us to talk to. Eli Manning retiring tomorrow. It's going to be a big deal. We're going to talk about that and what Eli Manning's career actually means and what we can kind of take away from it. So thank you again for listening. Peace out. Love you guys.